Okay.
Quite long.
Okay, this is a story. It's a story from about the Island of Conclusions from Simon Juster's The Phantom Tollbooth. Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Milo, and he was taking a drive with his dog Talk and with a friend called the Humbug. And they're driving along the sea of knowledge, and they're admiring the scenery, and they see this pretty island off in the distance, and it's full of palm trees and flowers, and it looks really nice. And as they're driving along, it's a pretty nice day, and everybody's feeling really good. And the Humbug says, well, nothing could go wrong now. And all of a sudden, he leaps out of the car and he flies off towards the island, and nobody notices. And then Talk is sitting there and he's enjoying himself, and he goes, well, I think we've got plenty of time to get where we're going. And poof, he flies off out of the car and towards the island. And Milo didn't notice any of this, and he was just driving along, and he says, well, it certainly couldn't be a prettier day. And he goes leaping out of the car and he goes flying off towards the island. And as they land on the island, they kind of shake themselves off and they look around and notice, this island isn't as pretty as it looked from afar. It's full of rocks, and there's all the trees are dead, and there's stumps everywhere. And they see this weird guy coming towards them, and he looks really confused. And Milo goes up to the man and he says, excuse me, sir, but can you tell us where we are? And the man looks at Milo and he goes, well, can you tell me who I am? And Milo is kind of taken aback because that's a weird question. And so he confers with his friends, and they decide, well, we're going to need some more information about you so that we can help you figure out who you are. And the man says, well, I am as tall as I can be, and he grows up really tall. And then he says, and I'm as small as I can be, and he shrinks down, and he's a teeny tiny size of a bug. And then he says, I'm as strong as I can be, and he lifts this huge boulder over his head. And then he says, but I'm also as weak as I can be, and then he falls over because of the weight of the boulder. And then he says, I'm as smart as I can be, and he says it in 12 languages. And then he says, I'm as dumb as I can be, and then he falls over because he put both of his feet in one shoe. And Milo and Talk and the Humbug confer amongst themselves, and they talk about it, and they decide, well, mister, I think that your name is probably Canby. And he says, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so because they helped Canby figure out who he was, they asked if he could help them, by telling them where they're at. And he says, well, we're at the Island of Conclusions. And he says,
Um,
and they said, how did we get here? And the man said, well, we got here by jumping. That's the only way you can get to the Island of Conclusions. And so anytime you decide something without having a really good reason, that's how you jump to the Island of Conclusions. And the Humbug doesn't like it here, and it's not a pretty island, and he's not having fun, so he says, I'm just going to jump back. And so he jumps, and nothing happens. And then he jumps again, and nothing happens. And he jumps a third time, and finally Canby says, you can't get back that way. It just doesn't work. And while they're talking, Milo is noticing that people are flying in from this way and that way in every direction. And the island is just getting crowded and crowded and crowded. And all these people are looking sad and lost, and they wander over to the beach, and they're looking across over at the mainland, and they want to get back, but nobody's doing anything. And Milo asks, is there a boat? How do we get back? How do we get off of this island? And Mr. Canby says, well, the only way that you can get back to the mainland is to swim through the sea of knowledge. And that's why this island is so crowded, because nobody wants to get wet, and it's a long trip. And Milo says, well, we need to get going. So he and Talk jump into the sea, and they start swimming and swimming, and they drag the Humbug with them because he doesn't want to go because he's a humbug. And they swim and they swim, and they're swimming for hours and hours and hours. And finally, they make their way back to the mainland, and they climb up and they dry themselves off, and they start wandering back towards their car. And the humbug says, well, I should visit there again. That wasn't too bad. And Milo says, well, not me. I don't ever want to go back. From now on, I'm going to have a really good reason before I make up my mind about anything, because you waste a lot of time when you jump to conclusions. The end.
Wait, what?
I like it.
Kind of